And Toback from our good friends at the Workers Circle. And Brianna Brown, who's with TOP, Texas Organizing Project, and also on the board of Center for Popular Democracy. And so we're going to jump into it. We're going to have about an hour-long discussion. We're going to leave some time for Q&A because this is a public conversation. And then we'll start to transition to the second part of this evening's program, which is a documentary about Black Voters Matter and the work that we did in 2020. And so we have with us the director of that documentary. So we'll bring her up a little while as we start to transition into that. But let's hop into it. And we're going to start off, since we're in Selma and we are commemorating the Selma to Montgomery March and Bloody Sunday, and which led to the Voting Rights Act. And so it's pretty appropriate that we start the conversation with, like, what's the status of that Voting Rights Act? And as some of you may know, there's a case right now which poses somewhat of a threat, to say the least, to the Voting Rights Act, or at least to Section 2. But I don't want to say too much because I don't want to steal headlines. So I'm going to pass it to Louis. Tell us a little bit about the Calais case and what the implications may be.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for being able to have LDF. So the case in question that everyone is talking about is Louisiana versus Calais, and that is a case in Louisiana. So first and foremost, I want to be able to set the ground for each and every one of you. After redistricting in 2020, we ended up finding out that Louisiana's population was 1/3 Black. But prior to the state ended up going through the redistricting process, only one of their 6 congressional districts had a majority Black population. So due to various lawsuits ended up initiating a redrawing that ended up allowing for a second majority Black district to be created. Through various lawsuits from non-Black plaintiffs, ended up bringing us to the lawsuit that we have today in front of the Supreme Court, Louisiana versus Calais, where ultimately the Supreme Court is trying to be able to decide whether or not there can be the consideration of race whenever it comes to redistricting. That is ultimately what it boils down to. Now, there are some legalese I could throw at you that try to complicate it, but ultimately that is the question that is in front of the Supreme Court. And some of the people next to me are going to talk about partisan gerrymandering and how that plays a very real role in what we are seeing today. But ultimately, the Supreme Court is trying to be able to decide whether or not the state of Louisiana can say, we are going to ultimately potentially discriminate on the basis of race in order to be able to help our political leaders of a particular party. That is ultimately the question that is happening right now. And our fearless leader over at LDF, Janae Nelson, ended up arguing in front of the Supreme Court on October 15th of last year to be able to say, like, that is not acceptable. That is unconstitutional. That is abhorrent to potentially be able to do that to Black people and limit the ability of Black people to elect a candidate of their choice. And so I know we're going to dig into those details a little bit more now, but ultimately, that is the question that is in front of all of us. And we also have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to tolerate if we don't end up getting a decision that ends up favoring one way or another? So I look forward to this conversation that we have in front of us right now, but it is definitely something that should be top of mind for everyone, because this is going to have very real impacts on whether or not Black people are going to be able to elect the candidate of their choice, not just now, but moving forward into multiple redistricting cycles, 2030, 2040, and beyond. This is very real, and it is happening right now.
All right, thank you for that. And so you just heard Louis talk about the case and, of course, racial gerrymandering. But one of the things that we know that we've seen a lot of in recent years is that there's been what's known as partisan gerrymandering. How many of y'all have heard of partisan gerrymandering, right? People going around, legislatures going around, and basically saying, oh, we didn't dilute those votes because they're Black. We were just trying to help our party, usually the Republican Party, to be able to get more seats, right? But we know that there's a very close line between racial gerrymandering and partisan gerrymandering. And in fact, sometimes the partisan is really just being used as a mask for what's really racial. But a lot of this became much more complicated with another case. Before the Calais case, there was the Rucho case. Do you want to tell us about what that case was?
Yeah, so Virginia from Common Cause, back in 2019, Common Cause had a case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, Russo v. Common Cause, and we were trying to determine how much partisan gerrymandering was too much. We lost that case. Ultimately, the court said, we're not going to define it. We knew at that moment, when that case was decided, that it was going to be a green light for racial gerrymandering. And the reason why is because when you look at the racial composition of who is registered in the parties, more Black and brown people at the time were registered as Democrats. So it was very hard to disassociate race from partisanship. And we knew that then people would say, well, it's a partisan gerrymander, it's not a racial gerrymander. And so what you see happening now, fast forwarding to 2026, is exactly that. They used it as a green light. I don't know, how many people liked the Peanuts, like Charlie Brown? Did anybody watch Charlie Brown? I like to describe it as like Pigpen. And
only one of y'all watch Charlie Brown?
Anybody
For real?
watch Charlie Brown? There was a character called Pigpen, and he always had like a little dust cloud around him because he was dirty. And he dressed up one year as a ghost, and he had like the little things in there. Everybody still knew it was Pigpen because there was this big cloud. We still know it's racial gerrymandering. We see it. We're not stupid. But the other thing I think that's really important as we think about the Calais case and the implications, we're going through a process right now. We've all seen what's happened when the governor of Texas, at the request of the president of the United States, said, I want you to get me more seats. It started off a mid-cycle redistricting war. Redistricting is supposed to happen every 10 years after the census. We go in, we decide what congressional districts look like, we build maps. There's all kinds of different processes that are used for that. But in this case, he triggered mid-cycle redistricting. Usually that's reserved because we found out that a map has been gerrymandered or incorrectly drawn. We don't usually draw maps mid-cycle. This Calais decision, if it goes the opposite direction and they say, we're going to get rid of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which means you can't do racial gerrymandering, it is going to continue to build off of these mid-cycle redistricting wars, and it could be all bets off. We could see districts being drawn very carefully. And remember, districts don't have to be continuous. I mean, we've seen some crazy gerrymandered maps where you see a district and then it's like 75 miles away, there's a little circle somewhere. The whole point of what they are doing right now and how they will use this is to absolutely carve out and entrench themselves in power for generations to come. And so one of the things that we talk about, and I know I'm going too long, but this is in some ways worse than what we faced in the Jim Crow South. Because there was a time when maps could be upheld. We had relief from the Justice Department, from our government. We had the ability to fight in courts. What we are finding now is that we may not have any relief, except, because I never leave people without hope, at the state level. And so we just passed, many of us, in Colorado, a state voting rights act. It's the first one that also had protections for people who were incarcerated and the LGBTQ community. The first action on that was at the Colorado state level took place, the first action against Colorado Springs for changing the date of their municipal elections. And so if there's something that I want people to walk away with, while we have deep concerns, there are solutions, but it's going to require deep organizing and power building to make sure that those legislative solutions can happen at the state level.
So you just said a couple of things. That's right. You just said a couple of things I want to circle back on, especially that last point about deep organizing. But before we do that, the great state of Texas was just invoked. And luckily we have somebody here who knows a little something about the great state of Texas. But before I pass it to you, Brianna, just to follow up on the point about the impact, Black Voters Matter and Fair Fight released a couple of months ago 2 sets of reports. You can go to our website and you can find links to them. One of them was on what the federal impact of a bad decision in Calais could be. And what the research shows was that there were 19 congressional seats, which almost immediately, some of the red states that have already shown their inclination to racially gerrymander, there are 19 seats that would be almost immediately at risk. At the state level, the second report was on the state level, like what, because this isn't just about Congress, right? These maps, the Calais decision, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, this impacts redistricting or maps at the congressional level, at the state legislative level, at the county commission level, at the municipal level, at the school board level. Are y'all getting the picture? There is not almost, there's no jurisdiction which draws any kind of maps or any kind of districts that would not be impacted by this case. So, but again, since Texas was mentioned, what can you tell us, Brianna, about this mid-decade redistricting and just what the situation in Texas overall is looking like? Is it on?
Okay. Just get cozy. Can y'all hear me? Howdy. I feel like I got to lead with that since I'm from Texas. You know, as the conversation has been flowing around the redistricting fight, you know, it started in Texas. And it actually started first in Texas in a county that the organization I work with, Texas Organizing Project, has been organizing for quite some time. And it was in Tarrant County, which is a little county kind of adjacent to Dallas County. And their goal was to erase the precinct.
Did you just call Tarrant County a little county?
Well, I mean, yeah. Well, in Texas, in Texas, listen. In Texas, our counties are the sizes of battleground states. Tarrant is not a battleground state size, so it's a little smaller than Dallas County. But they were seeking to erase a woman that we got elected actually in 2022, Elisa Simmons, a black woman. She's amazing. But they started with her. And it was, I mean, it was in rooms very similar to this. We filled them, we packed those rooms. And despite like efforts, it was very clear that folks in Tarrant County did not want that redistricting. And it was from like a whole kind of like spectrum. It wasn't just ideological. We saw that as a harbinger for what's to come. And then it moved to statewide, and Trump called our Governor Abbott, said he needs 5 votes. Abbott got about the business of trying to find those 5 votes. What was really dope is we've been building out this statewide infrastructure in Texas for several years called Texas for All. So when that happened, there was resistance, and I think that they were really not expecting that. They were expecting for it to be one of the steamroll kind of things that happen a lot in Texas, but we mounted resistance across the state. We had pop-ups and counties, thousands of people turned out. We pushed it towards, actually we got an injunction, and that wouldn't have happened without the organizing on the ground. Of course, we know what happened, right, is the Supreme Court upheld those maps. And in Texas, also in 2020, after that, the census happened, we had the largest population increase of anywhere else, and it was driven by folks of color. 19% of that was because of black folks moved back to Texas. I'm a 4th-generation Texan, right? And in response to that, what they did is they dissolved the one black majority district that we had, and then dissolved 2 Latino districts. That was their response. And what we've been mounting in Texas, I think, is borrowing from playbooks, not just of organizations that have been on the front lines recently, but we're going back to the days of Jim and Jane Crow, and figuring out like how not only through the kind of organizing we do, which is about building community and making sure that people are focusing not on like the shiny thing, but playing for the thing beyond the horizon. We've been really excited about being able to connect the work that we're doing in Texas to the larger fight
And we do that through the Center for Popular Democracy, which is a nationwide organization. I am on both of their boards, and we've really been spending the last, I don't know, since mid of last year, helping people understand about the dire condition of our 14th Amendment, and that these efforts, whether they're happening in Texas or New Jersey or California, that we all need to not be caught flat-footed, because we're really clear. Our analysis is that efforts to disenfranchise, like our folks, Black and Latino people across this country and other communities of color, really go at trying to dismantle the 14th Amendment, which is the thing that is delivered, whether, accessibility ramps and LGBTQIA rights. So one of the things that has been really important as we've been doing the work in Texas is to really link it to what's happening across this nation.
Thank you, thank you. You mentioned resistance. Yep, give it up for Brianna. So you mentioned resistance, right? And we've been talking about partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering. And one of the things that organizations like ours was fighting for, going back to 2021, was for a new wave of voting rights legislation, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, which was originally the For the People Act, and of course, and we always mention DC statehood, because the denial of the right to vote, or the full right to vote for DC, is an old form of voter suppression. And so, but many of us were fighting for this legislation in 2021 when this latest wave of voter suppression bills was coming out because of the big lie. And that's actually how three of us on here, at least, first kind of got connected. Me, Virginia, who at the time was with another organization, League of Women Voters, and Ann, as well as Noel, who are, of course, with the Worker Circle, but we were part of a coalition that was fighting to get that legislation passed all throughout 2021. And one of the things that we would do was civil disobedience. And at one particular event that was organized outside the White House by Virginia and her organization, it actually led to 5 of us getting arrested, me, Noel, who's with the Worker Circle, and 3 of our other colleagues who got arrested. But the point being that we were deeply involved in resistance to try to get the voting rights, this new voting rights legislation, similar to resistance that folks here in Selma were engaged in. No, we didn't cross a bridge and get beat up, but the notion of that we need to resist and use civil disobedience and use direct action, that at the end of the day, folks in Selma did not vote for the Voting Rights Act. Folks in Selma had to march and organize in order to get the Voting Rights Act, and we all knew that something similar was needed in 2021 and still needed today. So Ann, talk to us, because y'all were deeply involved. In fact, we would be on calls, and even when other organizations were kind of shaky, I could always count on Worker Circle to hold the line. So tell us a little bit, like, why did you all have that perspective, and where do you see the role of resistance and civil disobedience today?
Sure, thanks, Cliff, and it has been really incredible being on the front lines together. The Worker Circle was founded by Eastern European refugees who came to the United States a century ago, escaping violence. And they were a pretty fierce group. In Eastern Europe, they had created an organization of armed violence. They would bear arms against Russian troops who had come to the Jewish communities to murder them. So they come to the United States and immediately understand that while the opportunities of the democracy in the United States brought them here, first of all, that democracy wasn't complete and it wasn't being offered to everyone. One of the earliest connections they made was with the Black community, because they saw the United States treating the Black community much like they had been treated in Eastern Europe. In fact, they used to call the attacks and lynchings pogroms, which is what the Jewish community experienced in Eastern Europe. And they understood right away, we're not free if everyone's not free. And so the Workers' Circle still sees that. And we understand, if we can't all vote, we don't have democracy. We don't have a multiracial, multicultural democracy, but we don't have any democracy. I mean, really, and that's where what we're facing today. So just like our founders, we know everything's on the line, and we have to put everything on the line. This is not normal. We're not living in normal times, and we have to be prepared to give everything we can. Now, that doesn't mean everyone in the Workers' Circle is going to get arrested. And in fact, we don't need everyone to do that, but we need everyone. And I'm really talking about everyone across the country who has a stake in our democracy to step up and do something. So what the Workers' Circle is really focused on doing today is organizing people across the country, people who maybe have never done anything except vote and support a candidate, to do more. And we're seeing, and this is something I'm guessing everyone here is seeing, we're seeing people come out from the sidelines. We're seeing people, I'm just gonna give a shout out. My 89-year-old father showed up to an anti-ICE rally. Now, he was an activist his entire life, but a couple of years ago, he said, you know what, I'm done. Like, he makes calls. And then the other day, he's like, yeah, I just spent 4 hours in the freezing cold with a sign. And I was like, wow, that's cool. He said, what else am I gonna do? He said, I see what they're doing. I see who they're killing. So that's kind of an example, but there are people who are coming to us and saying, I know I need to do something, give me something to do. And that's something I think all of us are part of, is strategically placing people in positions where they're moving our democracy forward, where they're helping people get to the polls. So when I hear us talking about some really dire court cases, and we know we're going to be facing a bad landscape in November, we need to think about what's next. And what we at the Workers' Circle, and in partnership, we've partnered with everyone on this stage, with all organizations at different times. We all have to be together, be prepared. We likely will have to be at polling sites and making sure people can cross, even in the face of intimidation. So there's a lot at stake, and everyone has a role. That's my part. So yes, civil disobedience, but also just being in a position where you're not feeling that safe. And I know we've all been there. I was just in Minneapolis, and I saw firsthand what it's like to have your country standing there against you in an armed fashion. And, you know, here's to our Minnesota brothers and sisters who have been standing up for each other. We have to see what they're doing and be prepared. And hopefully, you know, it won't come to that everywhere, but getting out the vote, informing people of how to vote, because especially in communities of color, there are obstacles to voting. Tens of millions of people in America are being subjected to obstacles to voting, meaning they're not going to know where their polling site is until the last minute. The hours are changing. The ID laws are changing. So people need to be informed, and that's a big part. So I just want to say there's high level, and there's really a need for massive outreach and massive activism.
That's great, thank you. So let's pick up where Ann left off, and we could just make this an open discussion, because I think, like, you know, Ann was giving some examples of like this current moment that we're in, and some of the stuff some of the organizing we're seeing in Minnesota, some of the organizing that we've seen in DC, some of the organizing we've seen in Chicago, in Memphis. And so there are some, as bad as things have been, we're also seeing some incredible, courageous, creative organizing taking place. And so this is for anybody in any order. Like, what are some of the examples of some of the organizing that you're seeing, whether by your organization or just that you've just seen, you know, other folks doing? What are some of the examples that you've seen of organizing, whether it's the resistance organizing, or, you know, it could be like the mutual aid and looking after our neighbors type organizing. It could be the electoral organizing, like you were just saying, like creative ways of protecting the vote. We know that there's the possibility that there may be ICE agents at polling places, right? And come the midterm elections. What are the creative things that you all are seeing folks doing right now, just in terms of the electoral organizing, protecting the vote, or just as you were saying, Brianna, just mobilizing folks and getting folks to do so in any order? Anybody that wants to, just the essence of the question is, what's the good work? What's the good organizing that we're seeing right now? Anything that's moved you, anything that's made you be like watching on TV or on social media and being like, ooh, I want to do that. I'll tell you one of my favorites. It's not necessarily the deepest impact, but one of my favorites is watching the folks in DC. I don't know if any of y'all have seen this. Like as the ICE and National Guard were walking around, there's the guy that was going around playing the Star Wars music, like the Imperial March theme, right? And so, and it would just irritate them, like, because nobody wants to be the Empire, right? Nobody wants to be the Stormtrooper. So, so what's some examples of some of the creative organizing that y'all are seeing in any order?
Well, I think whenever you talk about like that 360, it's not just happening like at the ballot box. It's happening with scaled mutual aid. All the stories I heard out of Minnesota with protecting those families, making sure that people didn't have to leave their homes, and it was like your dad, right? It was like people who, are certainly not the paid activists that they think, right, are driving this, but people who were, as Fannie Lou Hamer would say, sick and tired of what? Being sick and tired, right? And I think that, I think about these moments as like real Vicks vapor rub. Like, wait, what is that? Everybody kind of smells this thing. And like what we saw in Texas actually in this last election, we blew through. There was historic turnout, in particular from the Democratic side in our primary. We just had our primary March 3rd. So I think that we're figuring out ways to harness, these moments so that people do know there are lots of things that you can do. Going to the ballot box and voting in midterm elections, which are a little different from like participating in presidential elections, is one of those things. Figuring out how to step up for your neighbors is a big thing. With that scaled mutual aid, it's been really dope in Texas. We started the handmaidens. When people dress up as handmaidens and they go to their state legislatures, and that's been resuscitated, and people have been. I think that those kind of actions that ride cultural waves, like, also help people tap in a different way. I know folks in the Popular Democracy Network have used music and art in ways that has been really moving. We actually do this thing in Popular Democracy where we've been recruiting members who have spoken word talents and doing like a slam, a national slam poetry contest. Because very much, I think one of the things that can come through whether it's like the pandemic, but these huge inflection moments, is wonderful and beautiful art that moves people differently from being around an organizing table, right? So those are a couple of things that I've seen and I know are that bring people to the table in a different way, and especially in this like political climate.
I'll add one of the things, and I have to say, like, just because it's my organization, one of my staff did this. Remember in Oregon when ICE started coming around and they were dressed in the inflatable costumes, the frog? That was one of our staff. And thank you, Kate in Oregon. She's not here tonight, but it was the idea that it's really hard to shoot a frog, right? Like somebody in an inflatable, when there is joy and there is music and there are people who are actually actively, joyfully participating in resistance. Because one of the things that they want us to do, joy is a counter to hate. Being joyful in a moment like that matters. One of the other things that I will say from an outside organization that I have loved is the trolling that Code Pink has done. They are going into restaurants in DC where government workers are, where you have, cabinet secretaries and people who have been, and just ruining their meal. making it uncomfortable for them to be in places and have a joyful meal. You cannot inflict the level of harm that you are inflicting on people and think that we are going to stand by and let you enjoy your dinner. Absolutely not. But another thing I will say, and it's funny because I met you after I met Tasha, one of your partners in crime, LaTasha Brown. Tasha and I were at Harvard, which sounds very foo-foo, but we were doing a panel together at Harvard. And it was in anticipation of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment that offered some women the right to vote. And we were on this panel, and she started talking about her experience as a black woman. And the moderator completely dismissed what she was saying and wanted to move forward because she didn't want to make it about race. And I looked at Tasha and I felt what, just in her body language, she kind of slumped down in the chair. And I wasn't going to let it pass. Because the organizing that we have to do and solidarity in the way that we show up is sometimes not in a big, bright way with a costume. Sometimes it's about organizing one people or three people or holding the line when we need to, because sometimes it's also the people who claim to be in solidarity with us that inadvertently can inflict harm. And so that leads me to another point when it comes to pushing back on people that we consider our friends. When you and I started getting arrested at the White House, everybody was telling us we had a campaign. People didn't want to join our campaign in the beginning. It was like 5 groups out there protesting, and they're like, okay, we're not going to arrest you. The first time they didn't arrest us, the first time. And we kept coming back every 2 weeks, and it was just our 5 organizations in the beginning. By the time December rolled around, and this is August, we had over 250 people getting arrested in front of the White House. But our friends, many of them said, well, Biden is our friend. We can't come after him. It's going to make it hard for him to pass his agenda. And we, I think Cliff and I and Ann and others who were joining us, we knew we don't have any permanent friends. And that war vote, yes, the War Powers Resolution yesterday that happened in Congress, the day before it was 1 Democratic senator. Yesterday it was 4 Democratic congressmen who voted not to rein in an administration who has illegally gone to war. So when I think about organizing, sometimes resistance is not just about big actions and mass mobilizations. It's how do we stand up to the people who claim to be our friends but don't have our best interests at heart. And at the end of that, what we had, at the end of those every 2 weeks getting arrested, and I think I got arrested like 10 times that year. We were fighting because we knew everybody else was putting pressure on the Senate. We said we have got to put pressure on the White House because until this president says we need a carve out on the filibuster to pass voting rights, it would not happen. And we made him so miserable. We had nuns getting their habits ripped off from when they were getting arrested. We put so much pressure, made it so uncomfortable. Shout out to April Ryan, who was in the White House press corps at the time and kept it alive, making Jen Psaki miserable, saying, what do you say to the people outside who are getting arrested? By January rolled around, you guys boycotted it because we went to Morehouse, and he made this big announcement, sat a bunch of us in the front row, staring right at me, and said, and I support a carve out to the filibuster. We moved a sitting president. So while we didn't get the win that we wanted, we harnessed our power because we held our friends accountable and forced them to muster the courage they needed to do what was right. And for me, those are the types of things that we can't look at it through just one lens. We have to use every tool in our toolbox to force people to do the right thing, because this is not a political moment. This is a moral moment for every single one of us.
That was a wonderful response. And I think for me, from LDS perspective, I think it's being able to remember historical events like what we're about to experience this weekend. Being able to celebrate and acknowledge all the struggle and the efforts that were put in order to be able to get us where we are today. I think that is also something that's very important to remember. And as we look back and we think about all the work our ancestors did in order to be able to get us to where we are today, we also have to realize that we are someone else's ancestors. That generations from now, people are going to look back at us and think, what did they do to continue to push things forward? What did they do in order to move the struggle forward? And whenever I think about that, I'm also very honored to be a part of an organization that for over 80 years, we have been actively working in order to be able to make sure that Black people were able to be not just second-class citizens, but we're able to be humans in this country. And I think that is such a very important part to remember, because there is no such thing as a second-class citizen. There is no such thing as a second-class citizen. You either are or you are not. You are either a human being or you are not. And I just want to make sure that everyone realizes that what we're about to do this weekend, what we're about to celebrate this weekend, what we're about to come together and do this weekend is to be able to celebrate and honor and enjoy each other, because without each other, without the solidarity, without this movement of progress that we have all been a part of, we wouldn't be able to have the rights that we have today. And so this is going to be a plug for our organizational work, but tomorrow LDF is doing a program at 4 p.m. tomorrow. We're going to have a keynote speaker. It's going to be Governor Westmore. Janae Nelson is going to be a part of a panel. We're also going to have Congresswoman Terry Sewell, who's going to do opening remarks. I hope to see you all there. But once again, all this work has to happen because we are doing it together. Nothing can happen whenever we are doing it separately. And so once again, I hope to be able to see you all there, but we have to make sure that we are honoring the legacy of those who have came before us to make sure we're able to push forward.
Yes, yes. Y'all give it up for the shameless plug. Give it up for the shameless plug. Ab, do you have anything?
My thoughts were really about this concept of resistance and resilience. And that's really also our founding, what our founders brought to us and the traditions we're moving forward. And that's shared by so many traditions. But, you know, things haven't been easy. We resist and we're together and we empower each other. And something that I keep hearkening back to is resilience and resistance doesn't come in the same form for every person. I think most of us here are probably people who want to be on the front lines. Is that a fair assessment? Raise your hand. I mean, we're out there, we're marching, we're doing. But not everyone wants to do that, and there's roles for everyone. Because I keep hearing from people, I don't really want to be on a march, and that's really okay. Because you can be making phone calls, you can be escorting people somewhere, you can be doing research. I mean, in Minneapolis, the whole community organizing, everyone has a different role. I mean, there were people who were checking on the references for people who would be on the ground, because they had to make sure that every person delivering food is actually somebody who's delivering food and it's not an ICE agent who's scouting out potential kidnappings. So we're all here. This is a pretty empowered group. Take it back to the people you know who aren't here and give them opportunities to get engaged. I mean, I love what you said, because being in Selma is the most empowering part of my year. I come back year after year. Being together, being in a community where we all come from different places, but we're all committed to something. Also, I want to put in a plug for seeing the foot soldiers who are still here amongst us. Thank God for them. They are truly the defenders of our democracy that I aspire to. I think we all aspire to their commitment. If you see them this weekend wearing the hats, thank them. Stop them. Tell them that they're heroes. Because we're losing them. And they really they're giving me hope. So every year I see men and women who really took the heavy lifts for us all. And now they're passing the torch to us. So yes, history's looking at us. We're looking at people who did it before us, and create those communities and inspire each other. And bring people into your community. That's community organizing. You all know people who are thinking about it, who are still on the sidelines. We need them.
All right. Virginia wants to say something, but I just want to kind of summarize what I'm hearing, and I've heard at least three themes in the answers that y'all gave. One of them is this issue of everybody's got a role to play, right? That's for all of you sitting here. If you are sitting here, guess what? You've got a role to play, right? Your role may not be my role. Your role may not be the same as Ann's role or Brianna's role, right? But you've got a role to play. It may be public speaking. It may be doing the artwork that's at the organizing or the protest or whatever. It may be singing. You may have some artistic talent or something that you bring, right? Which connects me with what Brianna was talking. Really, three of us in the examples that we gave were all examples that touched on culture, right? There's always got to be a space for some culture, some love, some joy in this work. You think that the SNCC Freedom Singers were singing like just to be singing? It's part of the organizing. It's part of what sustains the move. You can't sustain a movement that's outside of culture, because if you got a movement that's outside of culture, then at the end of the day, what are you trying to build? Like, what world are you trying to create that doesn't have space for that? And if you can't make it space in the organizing, then you can't create the society that you're trying to create. And so finding space for that culture, for that love, for that joy in the work that we do is critical to being able to sustain it. And the third thing that I heard was this importance of knowing our history, right? Coming to Selma, commemorating this, right? And it's important for a couple of reasons. One, because that there are some lessons there, some tactics there. Two, because it's part of honoring those foot soldiers, right? You don't want to just forget those who sacrificed so much. But the other reason, and I may have just lost my train of thought, but the other reason is this, right? And then I'm gonna give it to Virginia, and then we're gonna do Q&A. The other reason it's important for us to come here and commemorate and to know this history is this. It helps us to believe. Because at the end of the day, there's never been a successful movement where the people involved in it didn't believe, where they didn't believe in the possibility of their victory, right? Where they didn't believe in the righteousness of their struggle, right? You can't, a lot of us, if we're honest, some of us that do this work, we do it, we go through the motions, right? We do certain things every day, but fundamentally we don't believe. Because we're looking at the opposition and they look so strong. They got all those ICE agents. They got everything on their side. They got all the resources. Like, how am I going to compete with this? How am I going to compete with these dozens of state troopers that are on the other side of this bridge? How do I compete with that? You can't if you don't believe. And so we have got to have a deep belief in the possibility of our success. We've got to have a deep belief in the possibility that we can overcome the same stuff that folks in Selma overcame, or that those other folks in other movements were able to overcome. That Sister Harriet was. If you don't believe, then we got a problem. And this is the last thing I'm gonna say, and I say this a lot of time, and my wife always tells me, you need to make sure you mention that. And different people come from different faith, whatever. But from the faith that I come from, it's written that if we only had the faith of a mustard seed, in fact, not even a full mustard seed, if we had the faith of a grain of a mustard seed, then we could tell that mountain, move mountain, no matter what that mountain might be called. That mountain might be called ICE. That mountain might be called MAGA. That mountain might be called voter suppression. Whatever that mountain is, if we believe, we can move that mountain. And so if you get nothing else out of your time in Selma, out of reliving this history, over walking across that bridge, I need you to leave here believing in the possibility of our movement. Can we do that? No.
I hate when Cliff does this, because then I have to say something after him. This is my friend, so I could just be like, dude, seriously, you had to have a mic drop moment, and then you're like, oh, and Virginia got something to say. But one of the things that I think is important, and we gotta believe, but what do we believe in? Because there are a lot of people who believe that we want to get our democracy back, quote unquote. Bullshit, excuse my language. We did not have the democracy we want. We have to look at this moment as an opportunity to build the democracy we deserve. We can do all the things, but if it goes back to what we already had, that wasn't enough. What are we imagining collectively? How are we walking? What is our purpose? Is it to do what we already did? Or was actually to think in a visionary way about what is possible? So as we start to have these conversations at Common Cause, we're launching actually this week something called our Million Conversations. We are challenging ourselves to have 1 million conversations over the next few years with people throughout this country, because one of the problems that we face is that everyday people like you and I, they don't think about what we want. There is money in politics. There is so much corruption. So much of what is decided in this country by politicians is based off of how they will financially benefit. There are people who are suffering right now who can't make ends meet, don't have enough money to buy food because they just cut $180 billion out of food stamps for the next 10 years, while increasing the Pentagon's budget by $80 billion over the next 4 years. Guess what? With this war right now, we have to ask ourselves the question, who is financially benefiting? How many members of Congress who are trading stocks right now are invested in companies who are actually going to be benefiting? Their pocket is increasing. We know that it is more than just voting rights. It is about holding power accountable each and every single day and making sure that the people who are closest to the pain are part of the solutions. And that is what we challenge all of you. And that's why when you watch this film, I was there for many times during the filming of this documentary. Cliff, Tasha, April, the whole Black Voters Matter family, they had the blackest bus in America, as we called it. It was literally called the blackest bus in America. I'm not making that up. And they went around the country nonstop, talking to people in communities where no politician had gone before, asking people, what does democracy look like for you? What are your hopes and dreams? What would encourage you to get out and vote? What would encourage you to join our movement? And we are using that as part of our model for our Million Conversations, because we recognize that we are not going to white paper our way out of this situation. We are not going to protest our way out of the situation. We need to pull all the tools in our toolbox. We need all the people to be involved, but it has to come from impacted people. And so I am just hoping that when you watch this movie tonight, you see an example of joyful protest where you can create real and substantive change that come directly from the people who are most impacted.
There's a motto that we have at LDF that says we were built for this. And the reality is we were all built for this, because the history of Black people did not start at Jim Crow. It did not start at the Civil Rights Movement. It started way before this country was even a country. The history of immigrants started way before this country was even a country. And I just want to make sure that we all know, whenever our courage gets low and it feels as though there's nothing left in us, that we were built to be able to move forward, that we were built for this moment, that we were built to be able to imagine a brighter future. Because without that imagination, there is no hope. And hope is the best of things. And as long as we have that hope, there's nothing that can end up stopping us.
That's right, that's right.
One more thing, we all have to do it together. And what we see again and again organizationally is when we work together, we win. We're living in times where there's a lot of attempts to divide us. Dividing us is losing. I mean, we win when we're all together, and knowing that we're all together and we don't all have the same opinions. We have to be tolerant of differences. But collective engagement, our entire community is really needed. So that's the other piece. I know the Workers' Circle has partnered with each of these groups, and what we see is when we partner and join our power, we have victories. And I mentioned to Cliff before we started, we've been partnering with a voting rights group called Center for Common Ground. And we worked really hard with the center in Virginia, connecting with voters of color in Virginia for this last election. And what we saw, just empowering them to get to the polls and get correct information that matched what they wanted to vote for, we saw an incredible double-digit increase in voter turnout. And I think all of us liked what we saw in the results. So coalition, partnership, and that's something everyone here can be a part of too. It's okay, join the Workers' Circle, join Black Voters Matter, join any group, and just make things happen together. But don't isolate. I mean, we all have to encourage our communities to work together because we're so much stronger. And that also is a lesson we get from the civil rights movement. Alliances are everything today. So that's it. Thank you.
When we work together, we win. When we work together, when we work together, before we take it, I think we got time maybe to do one or two questions. And I'm gonna ask Dorisha, if she's here, to work your way up. And I also want to acknowledge Reverend Dr. Everett Kelly from AFGE, American Federation of Government Employees. Y'all know that government employees were going through some stuff, right? And and Nicole Austin, where's Nicole? Nicole Austin Hillary from CBC, yes. Foundation, yes. Okay. So we might have time. We don't have a mic, I don't think, to pass around, but if somebody has a question and just wants to shout it out, we'll do our best to give an answer. Does anybody have a question? Question. Not a comment. Not an observation. Certainly not a speech. A question. Going once. They want to see the movie? Y'all want to see the movie? Oh, okay. All right. Well, with that, I will bring up, or I'll thank our panel. Thank y'all. Y'all give it up for the panel. If you could, that would be good. Yeah. And I'm going to bring up my good friend. Have a seat. Just for a couple minutes before we get into the movie. The incredible director, producer, who helped create this movie that you're about to see, Dorisha Kai. Y'all give it up for Dorisha, award-winning director. Is that?
Testing. Good evening, everyone. It's such a joy to be here and an honor.
So we're gonna get right into it, but I just wanted Dorisha to be able to come up and just give us a little bit of context. When you and Travid, who's the other producer, came to us, it was actually like November, December of 19, maybe? Was it?
No, we came to you in the spring of 2020.
Was it the spring of 2020? Okay, so it was the spring of 2020. But whenever, it was early enough in the spring that it was before COVID. So we knew that 2020 was a presidential year. So, they had a feeling that, let's follow around this Black Voters Matter group. Like, this may be an important kind of a year, right? But this was before COVID. This was before George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. So it was before 2020 became all of what 2020 became. So just talk to us a little bit about why were you attracted to this project and this crazy organization?
So in 2020, My producer and I were talking about making a movie together. We'd been talking about making a movie together for about 6 or 7 years. And we kept pitching ideas to each other and nothing sort of resonated. And then finally one day she said, I went to college with April, Cliff's wife, from the Black Voters Matter Fund. And, they made history in 2016 with the Doug Jones election when he beat Roy Moore. And I think they're going to make history again. And I was like, I think so too. Wouldn't it be cool to be there and document history in the moment as it's being made and get a behind the scenes look at what it takes to do this work? And then everything blew up. Right. But they said yes.
Right.
So for us, it was kind of like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't we do this?
Right. And, we went through you all went through some challenges of doing this film, some that you had never had to go through before, like COVID, right? Yeah. And so as y'all are watching scenes in this movie, like you'll see situations where, like, I'm inside my house and talking, and you might be like, well, why have he got a mask on inside his house? Because there was a whole crew, that we wound up having to be masked, like, even in our own spaces, and then they always had to have masks. But the other challenge that y'all had to go through, and y'all are going to see one of the themes running throughout this film is around threats. Right? And you'll see some of the security issues we had to deal with, but this created a challenge for you all as well. Talk about that just for a sec.
So COVID brought a lot of not just logistical challenges, but also financial challenges, because we were trying to follow the protocols very strictly. And so we were traveling, normally we would travel, put our whole crew in one van, but we couldn't do that to stay safe. So we could only have 4 people in a van. We had to keep the windows down. We had to create bubbles. So, everybody had their bubble, right? So we became part of their bubble. And so that meant that we had to restrict ourselves when we were filming to not going out. I mean, there was no place to go anyway, but even to just socialize with the people who were in our other bubbles, to isolate ourselves. So there were the COVID restrictions and the finances of just trying to stay safe and doing constant testing and all these things that were not in our film budget. But the main threat was, one of the things you'll see, I'm gonna give something away. Is that there was, I would just say a threat. There was a threat to them that made us aware that we are in the line of fire because we're with them all the time. So if someone's coming after them, we're in the way, right? So they're coming after us. So this was the first time in my many years of production that we hired a security team who had to keep us safe, because we realized that the threats were real and that we, like I said, we're in the line of fire. And so that jacked our budget up a lot as well, because we had to feed them, we had to house them, and they had to be with us. And it was like something I'd never experienced before, but I realized that this is something that y'all deal with constantly. So where I already respected you, by the time we finished, I was like,
And we were the same, right? And so we want to get right to it. And so Derisha's going to be around for a while. And maybe afterwards, if folks have some questions, they can find her. But with that said, I think we'll get out the way and turn it over so that you can see Love, Joy, and Power, Tools for Liberation.
Enjoy. Thank you.
Enjoy it, y'all.